Let us move on to our seventh lecture, The Restoration Age, 1660 to 1700. First of all, I have to start with a historical summary. Once Oliver Cromwell had died in 1658, it took only a year for the regime to fold, and the king was called back, i.e. restored. Charles II thus returned, and the initial mood was one of liberation. The government of the godly was followed, as so often in history, by a period of exuberant license. Himself known as the Merry Monarch, Charles was far from a hermit. He famously said that he had always admired virtue, but could never imitate it. Despite the Great Plague of London in 1665, followed by the Great Fire in 1666, deep-seated gloom never ruled again. His attitude was also politically wise, inasmuch as general lavish spending, general refusal to adhere to any rigid principle, and a fairly temperate use of royal prerogative guaranteed, despite all attempts on the part of fanatics, that no second revolution took place. Religious divides had not really been healed, and a number of aristocrats and parliamentarians, soon known as the Whig Party, still wished to curtail the king's power, but nothing came to a head. Charles's far less flexible brother, James II, who succeeded him in 1685, rapidly demonstrated this theorem when the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688 ousted him, to the benefit of his Protestant cousin William of Orange, who reigned with his consort Mary, James's daughter, till 1702, imposing a permanent Protestant succession and, with the Bill of Rights, 1689, a constitutional settlement whereby the superior authority of Parliament over the monarch's executive powers was established. The first sign of the new license was the reopening of the theatres immediately in 1660s. Playwrights and their audiences, who had long been oppressed, but also simply bored by Puritan dislike for cakes and ale, to quote Shakespeare's famous line in Twelfth Night, now took their revenge, and they went full tilt in the opposite direction. Moreover, court patrons who had enjoyed continental taste during exile, French drama and opera in particular, fostered new subjects, new fashions, and new habits, including actresses on stage replacing boys. The iconic Nell Gwynn, here her portrait here by Sir Peter Lilly, who joined the long list of the King's Mistresses in 1668, is a fair representative of what the London stage world became. Brilliant and colourful, but also somewhat loose. The so-called orange girls at the theatres were actually selling more than oranges, if you see what I mean. Now, new genres emerged. First came the heroic tragedy, trying to adapt French models, Corneille's Le Cid, or the more coeval Racine, for instance, Bajazet would be a good model. These plays, these heroic tragedies, appealed to the aristocratic appreciation of honor, military prowess, and palace intrigues. On the other hand, you had the comedy of manners, reflecting the morally corrupt but light and witty atmosphere of court circles, salons, and London coffee or chocolate houses, where news, gossip, and politics circulated as well as beverages. Now, if you're interested in knowing what a coffee house or chocolate house was, well, you've got a footnote, so take some time and read the footnotes. The first name I have to mention is that of John Dryden, and in fact the period has sometimes been called the Age of Dryden. Dryden was Poet Laureate. I have explained what a Poet Laureate is in our previous lectures. He was also a playwright, and he is the best representative for the first genre, the heroic tragedy, with plays like The Conquest of Granada, Aurangzeb, and All for Love. These are long, artificial, and often grandiloquent plays in heroic couplets. You remember pentameters rhyming A, B, B, C, C, D, D, etc. Longing after French Alexandrines, in fact. Sometimes with an odd touch of exoticism. Aurangzeb, for instance, is focused on the line of the then ruling Mughal Emperor of India. The only playwright who wrote, revealing me in blank verse, tragedies with real depth and feeling and originality is Thomas Otway. Venice Preserved, 1682, had Europe-wide success and echo. Interestingly enough, for future developments in the 18th century, his play The Orphan or The Unhappy Marriage was already a domestic tragedy. Maybe we can take a look at a passage from Otway's Venice Preserved. This might give you an idea of the moral climate of the age. So in the brochure with text excerpts, I have included a passage, Act 1, Scene 1. Very often the opening of plays is very revealing. So this is from Venice Preserved, 1682. It takes place in Venice, obviously, with people conspiring against the government of Venice, and of course the conspiration will fail, the conspiracy will fail, and they will end up on the scaffold. You have two friends, Pierre and Jaffer. They are the most important characters. So here they meet. Enter Pierre. My friend, good morrow. How fares the honest partner of my heart? What, melancholy? Not a word to spare me? I'm thinking, Pierre, how that damned starving quality called honesty got footing in the world. Why? Powerful villainy first set it up, for its own use and safety. Honest men are the soft, easy cushions on which knaves repose and fatten. For all mankind villains, they'd starve each other. Lawyers would want practice, cutthroats rewards. Each man would kill his brother, himself. None would be paid or hanged for murder. Honesty, 'twas a cheat invented first to bind the hands of bold, deserving rogues, that fools and cowards might sit safe in power and lord it uncontrolled above their betters. Well, you see the cynicism here. This is, of course, a reminder, direct reminder of the theories of Thomas Hobbes. And it's really interesting to notice how, indeed, honest the language is. This language about honesty, and this is exactly what the characters will say at the end of this excerpt. You see, it's typical of the Restoration. People have had enough of oppression and repression, typical of the Commonwealth period, when you could not really say what you meant. With the Restoration, it's possible to say things and to be very, very immoral, unchristian, very, very cynical. Knaves are indeed identified as knaves. A spade is called a spade, typical of the period. And at the same time, there is an odd, and you see, this is where you go into the territory of what you might call moral corruption, because you see, they are admired. Bold, deserving rogues, you see, and the people in power are only fools and cowards. There is this climate of permanent rebellion, possibility of rebellion. And this is exactly what will happen in the play. The two men will launch a conspiracy. But let's end this excerpt. Then honesty is but a notion, nothing else, like wit, much talked of, not to be defined. He that pretends to most, too, has least share in it. 'Tis a ragged virtue, honesty, no more on it. Sure, thou art honest. So indeed men think me, but they are mistaken, Jaffier. I'm a rogue, as well as they, a fine, gay, bold-faced villain, as thou seest me. 'Tis true, I pay my debts when they are contracted. I steal from no man, would not cut a throat, to gain admission to a great man's purse, or a whore's bed. I'd not betray my friend to get his place or fortune. I scorn to flatter a blown-up fool above me, or crush the wretch beneath me. Yet, Japhia, for all this, I am a villain. A villain? Yes, a most notorious villain. To see the sufferings of my fellow creatures and own myself a man. To see our senators cheat the deluded people with a show of liberty, which yet they now must taste of. They say by them our hands are free from fetters, yet whom they please they lay in basest bonds, bring whom they please to infamy and sorrow, drive us like wrecks down the rough tide of power, whilst no holds left to save us from destruction. All that bear this are villains, and I one, not to rouse up at the great call of nature and check the growth of these domestic spoilers that make us slaves and tell us 'tis our charter. Well, you see, permanent rebellion. The only immoral thing is not to rebel. You will also notice the violence of the language and, again, very direct words. Whore's bed, typical of the Restoration. No hesitation in the language. Okay, sometimes very, very coarse. Well, you have here, right from this, an idea of the general climate. Somehow, liberation, the right to mention sex, the right to mention politics, okay, any kind of politics, including rebellion, including calling the government into question, but at the same time, sort of moral corruption and maybe not real happiness, or, okay, maybe generally a lack of balance. Now, let's return to the theatre, and let's mention the second genre, which is the greatest Restoration genre, the comedy of manners. It is the genre that is probably best remembered today. Again, it was nurtured by continental models, say the comedies of Molière. Do bear in mind, most of the Stuart courtiers had been in exile in Paris and in Saint-Germain for something like 15, 20 years. So they had absorbed the French tastes. Restoration comedies focused on, and this is where they go much further than Molière, they focused on intrigues of sex, marriage, and adultery, treated with cynicism and worldly wit. This, as I've just said it goes much further than French models and includes libertinism, definition in the footnotes. Extramarital affairs and quests for heirlooms are rationalized, argued, made subjects to experiments. Yet, oddly enough, women benefit. They are to be won not by devotion or lust, but by intelligence, brilliance, wit, and charm of manners. Once the old crones, including a few alcoholic ones, repulsive lechers and vulgar country bumpkins are defeated, the mistress and gallant, the two stock characters in the comedy of manners, will triumph. Character names in themselves tell it all. Here's a list of character names from those comedies. Fainall, Mirabell, Touchwood, Sir Fopling Flutter, Scrub, Sir John Brute, Squire Sullen, Lady Bountiful, Lady Fanciful, Mrs. Marwood, etc., etc. The most brilliant and amusing examples, because these comedies are really funny, to quote but a few in chronological order are, okay, Etheridge, She Would If She Could, well, just the title. Or The Man of Mode, Aphra Behn, she was a woman, with her forced marriage, 1671, Wycherley, Country Wife, Congreve, perhaps the best one, The Way of the World, 1700, and finally John Vanbrugh. Well, to give you an idea what it looks like, before we move on to Restoration poetry, let's have a look. The Country Wife, Wycherley. Again, Act 1, Scene 1. Here you will see the language, frankly, it's completely, wow, loose. That's the best definition of restoration comedy, the restoration comedy of manners. Everything is loose, including, as you can see, the total absence of verse. Prose is dominant in those comedies, and oh well, you'll soon understand. Scene 1, Act 1. Horner. A quack is as fit for a pimp as a midwife for a bawd. They are still but in their ways, both helpers of nature. Well, my dear doctor, hast thou done what I desired? I have undone you forever with the women, and reported you throughout the whole town as bad as an eunuch, and with as much trouble as if I had made you one in earnest. But have you told all the midwives, the orange wenches at the playhouses, the city husbands and old fumbling keepers of this end of town? Or they'll be radius to report it. I have told all the chambermaids, waiting women, tire women, and all women of my acquaintance, nay, whispered it as a secret to them, and to the whisperers of Whitehall, so that you need not doubt till 'twill spread, and you will be as odious to the handsome young women as the smallpox. Well, now I was hesitating in the reading sometimes because, as you can see, the syntax is very choppy. The spelling is, again, not yet standardized. You can very often come across things like this. You see, missing double L, abbreviations, use of apostrophe, unusual spelling. Okay, never mind. It's really readable. So you have a doctor named Quack, of course, and in the language, Quack is still just that, kind of charlatan, incompetent doctor. And look at the violence of the language. Wow. Un faux médecin est aussi utile à un macro qu'une sage-femme à un board, à une tenancière de maison close. Quelque part, ils aident la nature. Wow. You see the violence of it? You see, they immediately discuss sex and in really graphic details. Horner wants to spread a rumor that he is not interested in women. So the doctor, Quack, has been spreading the rumor, as he was given that instruction, so he did. And he says, je vous ai fait passer pour un eunuque avec autant d'insistance que si vraiment je vous en... Wow. You see, they even mentions, look at this. I've spread the rumor and I'm sure it will work. So he lists all the people who it has contacted. And he says, désormais, vous serez aussi repoussant pour toutes les jeunes femmes, aussi repoussant que, and Horner says, as the smallpox, aussi repoussant que la petite vérole. Wow, typical of restoration comedies. They're funny, but they're very coarse. They mention sex really directly. They mentioned all the corruption of London. I mean, he does not hesitate to say that, I've mentioned it, the orange wenches at the playhouses, the young women who sold oranges, but in fact, they sold, their bodies, right? Now, if you read through the rest of the passage, you will see exactly the same kind of, it's more than frankness, it's coarseness, definitely. Man of Mode, you'll read, it's exactly the same thing. So all around, cynicism, coarse language, big fat jokes, naughty words, naughty ideas, typical of the period. As I said, the essential problem might be lack of balance.